All right, guys, we are on the next little part of Chapter 9, the Midnight Duel. So, we are on the part where Malfoy has challenged Harry to a wizarding duel, and Ron is going to be his second. And again, Harry doesn't know what a duel is, so Ron had to explain it to him. But that is where we left off on page 154. So, all the same, it wasn't what you call the perfect end of the day, Harry thought, as he lay awake much later listening to Dean and Seamus falling asleep. Neville wasn't back from the hospital wing. Ron had spent all evening giving him advice, such as, if he tries to curse you, you better dodge it, because I can't remember how to block them. There was a very good chance they were going to get caught by Filch or Mrs. Norris, and Harry felt he was pushing his luck. Breaking another school rule today? On the other hand, Malfoy's sneering face kept looming up out of the darkness. This was his big chance to beat Malfoy face to face. He couldn't miss it. 11:30, Ron muttered at last. We'd better go. They pulled on their bathrobes, picked up their wands, and crept across the tower room, down the spiral staircase and into the Gryffindor common room. A few embers were still glowing in the fireplace. Turning all the armchairs... Oh... I always sneeze twice. You know that. So who knows what it's going to come. Oh, my allergies have been so bad. But okay, continuing. Am I going to sneeze again? No. Okay. Turning all the armchairs into hunched black shadows. They also reached the portrait hole when a voice spoke from the chair nearest them. I can't believe you're going to do this, Harry. A lamp flicked on. It was Hermione Granger, wearing a pink bathrobe and a frown. You, said Ron furiously, go back to bed. I almost told your brother, Hermione snapped. Percy, he's a prefect. He would put a stop to this. Come on, he said to Ron. He pushed open the portrait of the fat lady and climbed through the hole. Hermione wasn't going to give up that easily. She followed Ron through the portrait hole, hissing at them like an angry goose. Don't you care about Gryffindor? Do you only care about yourself? I don't want Slytherin to win the House Cup, and you'll lose all the points I got from Professor McGonagall for knowing about the switching spells. Go away. All right, but I warned you. You must remember that I said when you were on the train home tomorrow, you're so... But what they were, they didn't find out. Hermione had turned to the portrait of the fat lady to get back inside and found herself facing an empty painting. The fat lady had gone on a nighttime visit, and Hermione was locked out of Gryffindor Tower. Now what am I going to do? She said shrilly. That's your problem, said Ron. We've got to go. We're going to be late. They hadn't even reached the end of the corridor when Hermione caught up with them. I'm coming with you, she said. No, you are not. Do you think I'm going to stand out here and wait for Filch to catch me? If he finds all three of us, I'll tell him the truth, that I was trying to stop you, and you can back me up. You've got some nerve, said Ron loudly. Shut up, both of you, said Harry sharply. I think I hear something. It was sort of a shuffling. Mrs. Norris? Breathed Ron, squinting through the dark. It wasn't Mrs. Norris. It was Neville. He was curled up in the floor, fast asleep, but jerked suddenly awake as they crept nearer. Thank goodness you found me. I've been out here for hours. I couldn't remember the new password to get into bed. Keep your voice down, Neville. The password's pig snout, but it won't help you now. The fat lady's gone off somewhere. How's your arm? Said Harry. Fine, said Neville, showing them. Madame Pomfrey mended it about a minute. Good. Well, look, Neville, we've got to be somewhere. We'll see you later. Don't leave me, said Neville, scrambling to his feet. I don't want to stay here alone. The Bloody Baron's been passed twice already. Ron looked at his watch and then glanced furiously at Hermione and Neville. If either of you get us caught, I'll never rest until I've learned that curse of the Boygie Squirrel taught us, and use it on you. Hermione opened her mouth, perhaps to tell Ron exactly how to use the curse, but Harry hissed at her to be quiet, and they beckoned them all forward. They flitted across the corridors, stripped with bars of moonlight from the high windows. At every turn, Harry expected to run into Filch or Mrs. Norris, but they were lucky. They sped up a staircase to the third floor and tiptoed towards the trophy room. Malfoy and Crabbe weren't there yet. The crystal trophy cases glimmered where the moonlight caught them. Cups, shields, plates, and statues winkled with silver and glowed in the darkness. They edged along the walls, keeping their eyes on the doors at either end of the room. Harry took out his wand in case Malfoy leapt and started at once. The minutes crept by. He's late. Maybe he chickened out, said Ron. Then a noise in the next room made them jump. Harry only just raised his wand when they heard someone speak. And it wasn't Malfoy. "Sniff around, my sweet. They might be lurking in a corner." It was Filch speaking to Mrs. Norris, horror-struck. Harry waved madly at the other three to follow him as quickly as possible. They scurried silently towards the door, away from Filch's voice. Neville's robes had barely whipped around the corner when they heard Filch enter the room. "They're in here somewhere," they heard him mutter. "Probably hiding." "This way," Harry mouthed to the others. Petrified, they began to creep down a long gallery full of suits of armor. They could hear Filch getting nearer. Neville suddenly let out a frightened squeak and broke into a run. He tripped, grabbed Ron around the waist, and a pair of them toppled right onto a suit of armor. The clanging and clashing were enough to wake the whole castle. "Run!" Harry yelled, and the four of them sprinted down the gallery, not looking back to see whether Filch was following. They swung around the doorpost and galloped down one corridor, then another, Harry in the lead, without any idea where they were or where they were going. They ripped through a tapestry and found themselves in a hidden passageway, hurtled along it, and came near their charms classroom, which they knew was miles from the trophy room. "I think we've lost him," Harry panted, leaning against the cold wall and wiping his forehead. Neville was bent down, wheezing and spluttering. "I told you," Hermione gasped, clutching the stitch in her chest. "I told you." "We've got to get back to Gryffindor Tower," said Ron, "quickly as possible." "Malfoy tricked you," Hermione said to Harry. "You realize that, don't you? He was never going to meet you. Filch knew someone was going to be in the trophy room. Malfoy must have tipped him off." Harry thought she was probably right, but he wasn't going to tell her that. "Let's go." It wasn't going to be that simple. They hadn't gone more than a dozen paces when a doorknob rattled and something came shooting out of a classroom in front of them. It was Peeves. He caught sight of him and gave a squeal of delight. "Shut up, Peeves, please. You'll get us thrown out." Peeves cackled. "Wandering around at midnight, ickle firsties. Tut, tut, tut. Naughty, naughty. You'll get caughty." "Not if you don't give us away, Peeves, please." "Should tell Filch, I should," said Peeves in a saintly voice, but his eyes glittered wickedly. "It's for your own good, you know." "Get out of the way," snapped Ron, taking a swipe at Peeves. It was a big mistake. "Students out of bed!" Peeves bellowed. "Students out of bed! Down the charms corridor!" Ducking around Peeves, they ran for their lives, right to the end of the corridor where they slammed into a door. It was locked. "This is it," Ron moaned, as they pushed helplessly at the door. "We are done for. This is the end." They could hear footsteps, Filch running as fast as he could towards Peeves, shouting. "Oh, move over," Hermione snarled. She grabbed Harry's wand, tapped the door, and whispered, "Alamahora." The lock clicked and the door swung open, and they piled through it, shut it quickly, and pressed their ears against it, listening. "Which way did they go, Peeves?" Filch was saying. "Quick, tell me." "Say, please." "Don't mess with me, Peeves. Where did they go?" "Shan't say nothing if you don't say please," said Peeves in his annoying sing-songy voice. "All right, please." "Nothing. Ha ha. Told you I wouldn't say nothing if you didn't say please. Ha 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 ha." They heard the sound of Peeves whooshing away and Filch cursing in rage. "He thinks this door is locked," Harry whispered. "I think we'll be okay. Get off, Neville." For Neville had been tugging on the sleeve of Harry's bathrobe for the last minute. "What?" Harry turned around and saw quite clearly what. For a moment, he was sure he'd walked into a nightmare. This was too much. On top of everything that had happened so far. They weren't in a room as he'd supposed. They were in a corridor, the forbidden corridor on the 3rd floor. And now they knew why it was forbidden. They were looking straight into the eyes of a monstrous dog. A dog that filled the whole space between the ceiling and the floor. It had 3 heads, 3 pairs of rolling, mad eyes, 3 noses, twitching and quivering in their direction, and drooling mouths, saliva hanging in slippery robes from yellowish fangs. It was standing quite still, all 6 eyes staring at them. And Harry knew that the only reason they weren't already dead was that their sudden appearance had taken it by surprise. But it was quickly getting over that. There was no mistake that those thunderous growls what those thunderous growls meant. Harry groped for the doorknob. Between Filch and death, he'd take Filch. They fell backwards. Harry slammed the door shut, and they ran. They almost flew back down the corridor. Filch must have hurried off to look for them somewhere else because they didn't see him anywhere. But they hardly cared. All they wanted to do was put as much space as possible between them and that monster. They didn't stop running until they reached the portrait of the fat lady on the 7th floor. "Where on earth have you all been?" she asked, looking at their bathrobes hanging off their shoulders and their flushed, sweaty faces. "Never mind that. Pigs now, pigs now," panted Harry, as the portrait swung forward. They scrambled into the common room and collapsed, trembling into armchairs. It was a while before any of them said anything. Neville, indeed, looked as though he'd never speak again. "What do you think they're doing, keeping a thing like that locked up in a school?" said Ron finally. "If any dog needs exercise, that one does." Hermione had gotten both of her breath and her bad temper back again. "You don't use your eyes, any of you, do you?" she snapped. "Didn't you see what it was standing on?" "The floor," Harry suggested. "I wasn't looking at its feet. I was too busy with its heads." "No, not the floor. It was standing on a trap door. It's obviously guarding something." She stood up, glaring at them. "I hope you're pleased with yourselves. We could have all been killed, or worse, expelled. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to bed." Ron stared after her, his mouth open. "No, we don't mind," he said. "You think we've dragged her along with you, wouldn't you?" But Hermione had given Harry something else to think about as he climbed back into bed. The dog was guarding something. What had Hagrid said? Gringotts was the safest place in the world for something you wanted to hide, except, perhaps, Hogwarts? It looked as though Harry had found out where the grubby little package from Vault 713 was. All right, I'm going to now read a little bit more of Chapter 10 just to make sure that we get through the whole book. So Chapter 10, Halloween, a lot of our favorite holidays, right? All right, Halloween. Malfoy couldn't believe his eyes when he saw that Harry and Ron were still at Hogwarts the next day, looking tired but perfectly cheerful. Indeed, by the next morning, Harry and Ron thought the meeting with the three-headed dog had been an excellent adventure, and they were quite keen to have another one. In the meantime, Harry filled Ron in about the package that seemed to have been moved from Gringotts to Hogwarts, and they spent a lot of time wondering what could possibly need such heavy protection. "It's either really valuable or really dangerous," said Ron. "Or both," said Harry. But as they knew for sure, the mysterious object was that it was about 2 inches long. They didn't have the chance of guessing what it was without further clues. Neither Neville nor Hermione showed the slightest interest in what lay underneath the dog and the trap door. All Neville cared about was never going near that dog again. Hermione was now refusing to speak to Harry and Ron, but she was such a bossy know-it-all, they saw that this was added bonus. All they wanted now was a way of getting back at Malfoy, and their great delight, just a thing arrived in the mail about a week later. As the owls flooded into the great hall as usual, everyone's attention was caught at once by a long, thin package carried by 6 large screech owls. Harry was just as interested as everyone else to see what was in the large parcel, and was amazed when the owl soared down and dropped it right in front of him, knocking his bacon to the floor. They had hardly fluttered out of the way when another owl dropped a letter on top of the parcel. Harry ripped open the first letter, which was lucky because it said, "Do not open the parcel at the table. It contains your new Nimbus 2000, but I don't want everybody knowing you've got a broomstick, or they'll all want one. Oliver Wood will meet you tonight on the Quidditch field at 7 o'clock for your first training session. Professor McGonagall." Harry had a difficulty hiding his glee as he handed the note to Ron to read. "A Nimbus 2000, Ron moaned enviously. "I've never even touched one." They left the hall quickly, wanting to unwrap the broomstick in private before their first class, but halfway across the entrance hall, they found the way upstairs barred by Grab and Goyle. Malfoy seized the package from Harry and felt it. "That's a broomstick," he said, throwing it back to Harry with a mixture of jealousy and spite on his face. "You'll be in for this time, Potter. First years aren't allowed to have them." Ron couldn't resist. "It's not any old broomstick," he said. "It's a Nimbus 2000. "What did you say you've got, Malfoy? A Comet 260? Ron grinned at Harry. "Comets look flashy, but they're not in the same league as a Nimbus." "What would you know about it, Weasley? You couldn't afford half the handle." Malfoy snapped back. I suppose you and your brothers have to save up a twig by twig. Before Ron could answer, Professor Flitwick appeared at Malfoy's eyebrow. Not arguing, I hope, boys, he squeaked. Potter's been sent a broomstick, Professor, said Malfoy quickly. Yes, that's right, said Professor Flitwick, beaming at Harry. Professor McGonagall told me about the special circumstances, Potter. And what model is it? A Nimbus 2000, sir, said Harry, fighting not to laugh as he looked at the horror on Malfoy's face. And it's really thanks to Malfoy here that I've got it, he added. Harry and Ron headed upstairs, smothering their laughter at Malfoy's obvious rage and confusion. All right, that is where we'll stop for now, and you'll have to see what happens on Halloween tomorrow.